Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Grajdek. I'm Dr. Martha Grajdek. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. Whether we look at work performed at an office or a factory or any other setting, any industry where people perform some kind of work, the idea of productivity tends to be part of the experience and part of the conversation. Productivity is something that most organizations, almost all organizations, have an interest in understanding and refining. But in today's episode, we'll look more closely at the idea of not refining productivity, but rather redefining it. For as long as people have been doing work and going to work, wherever that may be, productivity was something that was expected by the organization and something that was constantly to be refined and improved. And over the many decades and centuries, productivity has become one of those things where quantity seemed to be more important than anything else. It was held up above everything else, such as perhaps oftentimes quality, and certainly many times above meaning to the work performed by an employee. And while one can argue that there's a time and a place for quantity, especially when we look at margins, profits, bottom lines, and competition among companies, there has to come a time at which an organization looks up from its books and spreadsheets and actually considers the value of quality and meaning in the output that it produces and that its employees produce. We can think of this focus on high yields or producing a high outcome in terms of quantity as a hustle of sorts, a hustle culture even within an organization, where the highest regard, what matters the most is how many widgets a company produces, a factory produces, or how many bits of data or how much information an individual actually processes. And while that may sound good for the bottom line, it's not necessarily a good thing for the workplace experience and therefore not a good thing for the long term of the organization and its workforce in terms of well-being and health. What happens when an organization continues to push individuals to keep improving, to keep producing more? Sometimes it's sheer psychological pressure. Other times this is done by incorporating tools and resources that allow an individual to produce more. And while on the surface it sounds like a much better option to provide tools or resources that will allow a person to be more productive as opposed to simply pressuring them to work harder and work faster, in the end it still becomes a high pressure environment where whether on their own without any extra tools or resources, or with the use of tools and resources, an individual is expected to somehow continuously produce more and oftentimes consume less to yield the same results. When we look at that kind of approach, that kind of mentality, it's fine for machinery because over time we can invent and incorporate and use machines that are bigger, better, faster, and yield better results. However, humans have limits. We are not machines. And regardless of how many tools, how many gadgets, how many resources a company can provide for an employee, there is a limit to how much of an output that employee can provide in return. All too often, organizations seem to forget that and act as if, as long as there are enough resources and new tools or gadgets, then the individual employee should be somehow endlessly be able to refine what they produce. And while that may work for a little while, it ends up leading to overwork. And when we have overworked employees, especially over time, bad things start to happen. The simplest and most obvious thing to expect are diminished outputs or results from employee efforts. Simply put, overworked employees cannot produce the same as employees who are not and have not been overworked. Humans get tired, they get stressed, they get anxious, and they get burnt out. Despite their best efforts, organizations simply cannot treat humans as if they were machines and expect them to continue without any detrimental changes. Something else that is often seen in this kind of environment, in hustle culture, if you will, is that beyond simply producing less or diminished quality of work or more stress for the employee, more anxiety, higher rates of burnout. Of course, with all of that come things such as health issues, both physical, psychological, and emotional health issues. But beyond all of that, as if all of that wasn't bad enough, at one point, employees will simply start to disengage from their work and what they do. This is when we can expect higher turnover rates, higher rates of accidents, higher rates of mistakes. It's not that difficult to understand that pushing employees to endlessly increase their output has its limits and can, in fact, be very detrimental to both the individual employee, the workforce as a whole, and the organization itself. Organizations tend to want to have longevity in their market. While it's great to succeed today, this month, this quarter, this fiscal year, the idea for most organizations is to be around and be successful for many years to come. As such, any and every organization that has thought about their own future will do well to change their focus from sheer quantity in terms of production to things that matter for long-term success. Now we're talking quality. Now we're talking meaning. When an organization produces quality products and services, over time, that can help to ensure their staying power within their own market. But that also improves the overall well-being of their workforce. When an organization focuses on quality and meaning, that takes things to the next level as far as company's culture and the workplace experience for their employees. It's not difficult to understand the tremendous difference between the experience of one employee who shows up for work only to be pushed endlessly to go faster and produce more every single day, as opposed to an employee who can come into work and is expected to focus on quality and is allowed to bring meaning into what they do at work every day. How can an organization then encourage quality output from their employees? How can an organization support and encourage quality experiences, workplace experiences for their employees? For one, an organization can start by setting better, more realistic goals where meaning and higher quality are the focus. Such a shift in goals can allow individual employees to actually be more focused on what they do, yielding better quality products or services, decreasing things such as mistakes or accidents or turnover rates, and certainly allowing employees to find meaning in what they do and therefore have a different level of experience and enjoyment at the workplace. An organization can encourage the idea of being more fulfilled at work. And while some people are more likely to be interested in or embrace the idea of finding fulfillment at work than others, and that's understandable, and some jobs are simply more likely to provide fulfillment for people than other jobs. We can all understand and be realistic with that, but an organization still has the responsibility of encouraging their employees to find fulfillment in what they do, whether it's the tasks and responsibilities themselves, whether it's the contribution that the employee makes to the company, or the contribution that the organization makes to its customers or its clients or the surrounding area where they're located, or to humanity in general, or whether it's fulfillment on a personal level, being able to be part of an organization that allows an individual to provide for themselves, for their family, for their community in ways that they find meaningful. There are so many ways in which an organization can encourage fulfillment for their employees that their imagination is their only limiting factor. So even if it would be difficult for an employee to see what they do at work as being tremendously meaningful to humanity, they can still find meaning in their own personal lives by having stable employment, by being able to contribute and in return provide a stable life for themselves and their family, and be able to engage in things that have meaning to them outside of work as a result. Alignment of values is an important consideration. When a company's values are not defined or poorly defined, it's much more difficult for individual employees to be able to decide whether or not their own values are aligned with that of their employer. But when values are well defined, this gives employees an opportunity to have that understanding of how their own values align with those of the organization. And ideally, they should not be opposing values. They should not be on opposite ends of the spectrum. So while an organization's values, when well defined, will be whatever they will be, it provides the opportunity for every single employee to make that decision of whether or not they should join the organization or of whether or not they should stay within the organization. This is a big deal when we consider meaning and fulfillment at work. An organization can encourage employees to have pride in their work and what they do. This can be done in so many different ways, from the top to the very bottom of the organization, at the levels of the organization's culture, the daily experience, how leadership and management recognize people's efforts, and so many other ways. So rather than rushing people to produce more of mediocre outcomes, an organization has every opportunity to encourage high-quality, meaningful experiences through pride in one's work. And of course, every organization has the responsibility of promoting and supporting work-life balance. This is something that can often happen almost automatically when an organization is more focused on quality and meaning. But almost is the key word here. It should not be something that is taken for granted or assumed. A well-balanced experience between one's work and non-work domains is a responsibility of both the organization and the employee. A company-wide adoption of this idea or the concept of quality and meaning over quantity is key. And while it's something that may start within certain specific departments or locations of a larger organization, in order for it to be most impactful, it really has to be something that is embraced by the entire company. The organization and those in leadership and management positions absolutely have to prioritize quality and meaning over quantity. The other thing to consider is the whole idea of competition versus collaboration, especially when it comes to internal workings of an organization. Far too many companies promote competition within the organization as a way of increasing output from their employees, when in fact, collaboration in its truest sense would yield better results and provide a healthier, more sustainable long-term experience. The bottom line of making that switch from higher outputs in terms of quantity to better quality and more meaningful experiences comes down to embracing a sustainable productivity model. Companies absolutely have to think long-term if they want to be successful, continue to make a healthy profit, and enjoy staying power within their industry. This kind of philosophies and the changes that go along with them absolutely have to happen at a company-wide level, including the organization's culture. As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. While for many, many years, companies tended to focus on refining productivity in terms of higher yield and quantity over all else, we now understand that in order to achieve lasting results for both the organization and its profits, companies will do better by focusing on quality and meaning over sheer quantity. Pushing people to the brink of their limit tends to backfire. Things such as poor outcomes, increased errors and mistakes, increased likelihood of accidents, and higher turnover rates are just the tip of the iceberg. Stress, anxiety, and burnout can quickly become part of the workplace experience when employees are constantly pushed to their limits. Organizations have the responsibility and the opportunity of encouraging quality work from their employees. Setting more realistic goals and focusing on things such as value, pride in one's work, work-life balance and alignment of values are key components of making the switch from focusing solely on quantity and making the switch over to higher quality and more meaningful workplace experiences. And while the changes may start on a small scale, in order for companies and their employees to be successful on a long-term basis, these changes have to be embraced at a company-wide level. In short, the focus on quality and meaning has to become part of the company, its culture, and its DNA, if you will. As the week unfolds, I encourage everybody to take a look at the idea of productivity within their own organization, whether or not you are a business owner, whether you're in leadership or management positions, or whether you are an individual employee who is not in management or leadership. Everybody can look around and make an assessment in regards to what drives productivity within the organization. From there, I encourage everyone to start the conversations of how productivity can change within the organization to ensure not only better output, but a better workplace experience for the employees and a more sustainable organization as it moves into the future. For those of you who experience this podcast in an audio-only version, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel, Stress Free with Dr. G, where you can find the video version of the podcast. While you're there, check out some of the other videos which focus on a comprehensive approach to stress management. Stress Free with Dr. G is found on YouTube, and the link for that is in the description below. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.